Hello friends, this is Old Dad coming to you from the mountains of southeast Tennessee once again. This is my 9th route creation tutorial for Train Simulator Classic. This outing we will be discussing a couple of different subjects. First we will look at installing a milepost and how you can determine where a milepost should be. Next we will have a major discussion on adding scenery to your route. This will be a basic instruction and very extensive. It's a long tutorial, and I suggest you bookmark the video and come back and watch it in 2 or 3 segments. This tutorial is so long because there's so much to cover. If you're familiar with my tutorials, you know this old southern boy takes his time getting to the point. That's just the way it is, my friends. So be patient, and I think you will find much that will be helpful to you. As is my usual practice, I'm teasing you with some scenes from the route I'm creating in Train Simulator Classic. In the scenario we are watching, the pushers are assisting a northbound CSX train with Norfolk Southern and Southern Pacific locomotives. There is a thunderstorm that's threatening to arrive and make the pull even more difficult on wet rail. My route is a work in progress and represents the Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis, Louisville and Nashville, and CSX Chattanooga subdivision around Cowan, Tennessee. It also includes the Tracy City branch, where we will be conducting our tutorial today. This mainline railroad crosses Cumberland Mountain, and it was built on the best footing that could be constructed when it was surveyed in the 1840s and then completed in the 1850s. It involved climbing over the Cumberland Plateau on 2% grades, and at the apex, a tunnel over 2,200 feet long. From the beginning, it was soon realized that helper engines would be needed to keep the trains moving on the steep grades on both sides of the tunnel. Still today, the powerful pushers are coupled into the CSX trains at Cowan on the north side and Sherwood on the south side to assist. Doing the scenery on a route and making it look proper and lifelike is a slow process. Do not be discouraged when you spend a long time doing it right. I think the results are worth the effort. Don't be afraid to try new things, and you'll soon have created something that you will enjoy. Doing scenery is just like painting a picture. I liken it to being like the famous American television art instructor, Bob Ross. His patient style and knack for putting those happy little trees into the scenes he magically made appear is exactly what you will be doing in the route editor. So remember, it's for fun, and enjoy the work that you put into it. As usual, I want to give you my disclaimers. First, I cannot be responsible for what you do in your route editor or to your own computer. If you haven't already, I suggest you back up your game before doing any route editing on another device. Also, as you create in the editor, remember to save, and then save again. Nothing is more frustrating than spending 30 minutes creating an epic scene, and then the program crashes and whoosh, all of your work is gone. So now let's leave this stormy scene and get started with our tutorial. Okay, here we are at the start of my route in Palmer, Tennessee, and up here in the navigation bar we have the coordinates of the location of Palmer, and this is not where I'm actually going to be doing the work for this tutorial. And I have created in an Excel spreadsheet locations on my simulation where I have been creating things, and I use the latitude and longitude of those locations so I can fly over to the point where I'm actually going to do some work. When you enter the game, you always go to your starting point, which in this case happens to be in Palmer. So I'm actually going over here to where we're going to do the tutorial start at 35.15452. I'm going to enter that into the navigation bar here at the top, and minus 85,98745. I'll click the go button, and that takes me to a point on my railroad that I wanted to start at to show you an area that's largely had all the scenery completed. Everything that you see here was added by me during the creation of this route. It's taken some time. I've been working on this for a couple of years, and zip up here, take a look here. Everything that you see here that highlights as I move the cursor over is an individual asset that's been added into the simulation by me. The telephone pole, the trees, the bushes, the shrub. Obviously I laid the track, I laid any of the roads that you see in the route, but all of these things were individually placed or placed in a group with an asset block, and we're going to explain all that as we go through this tutorial. As I said, this will be a long tutorial, and we're going to have a lot to talk about in here, so hang in there with me. I want to show you here, this is a scene here in the simulation where the Tracy City branch splits off from the main line of the Chattanooga division and starts heading towards the tunnel, which is around this next curve up here. But I've got an image I want you to compare to. One of the things that you do when you're creating a route is you want to go find as many images as you can of what the route actually looked like. This is an old 35mm slide of the area that I'm creating in the simulator. You can see the mountain topography is showing up here, very similar. I've laid the tracks using Google Overlay and my profile charts into their approximate position, and I've been working on things like the pole line and rocks and bushes and trees, and you can see you can create a very good facsimile in the simulator. So we move on up the mountain here, heading up the main line. Signals are installed. Location points, I often make use of these pins right here. In my asset list over here, it's A marker 01, and I can use that to designate something. For instance, if I want to show where there's going to be a bridge, I can take these asset markers and show the beginning points and ending points of the bridge. And then as I'm creating the railroad later, coming back and doing bridges, I can remember that there's a bridge that's supposed to go in there. So that's one of the things you can do. I use that marker as a means of recognizing where something belongs. I don't need this marker here anymore. It was just there. That's what made me think of talking about it. Here you see a milepost, and one of the first things that we're going to do today is I'm missing a milepost. Milepost number 7 is missing. This milepost is from the Horseshoe Curve asset list, and this is the milepost that I've decided to use. It very similar to a CSX milepost. This little gizmo here is the point at which the milepost is actually located on the route, and that's what makes it show up in the two-dimensional map when you're looking at where your train might be. That's how it shows up within the two-dimensional map, is the little gizmo that goes to the track. While we're talking about the asset list for just a moment, we'll mention that you have your object set filter, which if you click that, you see the list, the drop-down menu of all the assets that you have downloaded within your RailWorks folder, all the various assets from various creators, many different creators, Dovetail Games, DTM, individuals that have created things, MLW Audio. RCAP is the RailWorks America group that created a lot of assets. RSC is another big creator. Lots of different ones. Searchlight Simulations. And these are some various free and payware assets that have been downloaded into the RailWorks folder. And when you want to import them into the game, you use this object set filter, and you come over and of course you click a particular asset to bring it into the game. You have to check these boxes, and then it will appear in your asset list, which is this list on the side over here. And then you can see I have lots of assets loaded in here from the various routes, and I use from nearly every route something, because you have to go and pick and choose what will work in your route that's prototypical or that's pleasing to your eye when you're creating. I also create a list of assets that I use frequently, so that I'll have kind of an ongoing list of things, and I get to wondering what route did this tree set come out of. Sometimes you can click on it and it will give you some information here. Sometimes it's not very specific. This is sort of confusing scenery, vegetation, 2019, near tree. It doesn't really tell you anything about what route it came out of. In the case of our milepost, that's the horseshoe curve. Let me scroll down through the list and we'll find milepost. And there's an example of the milepost. And if I right click on that milepost, or double click on it I should say, this particular asset is described as Rail Network Milepost HSC. So I know that milepost came from the horseshoe curve asset list. Sometimes the creators did not give any specific designation to it, and it's kind of hard to figure where you might have picked something up. A lot of the creators use the same assets. They might tweak it just a little bit and then call it their own, but a lot of the assets are shared between routes, especially the ones that are created and sold through the Steam or the Dovetail Games websites. A lot of those assets are shared. So anyway, as we continue along here looking at my route and getting back to the main subjects, adding scenery to the route, all of this is done by hand, and you can tweak it to get it to the level that you want it to be, so that you don't have floating assets. And you come back and you add all of these pieces in there individually, and as I go farther up the mountain, you will see that there is less and less that I have completed. That's because it's an ongoing work. Another milepost number 3. Then we eventually get to a point where it's really nothing but the track, and I've gotten it cut through the scenery at the correct grades, and you might see a road off in the distance down in the valley there that I'm working on getting the elevations set correctly on. But we work all the way up the mountain and we see Sometimes it's a fill, sometimes it's a cut that the track has been laid on, and it's several miles to reach the top of the mountain. As we near the top of the mountain, I've been doing some work, adding some trees, creating this rock cut. This is kind of neat. I'm working on trying to create things that look very similar to what's actually there. Photographs are very important. If you can attain photographs of the route, what it might have looked like. This particular route, of course, is abandoned. The Tracy City branch has been abandoned since 1986. So I'm fortunate to go back and find from various sources, photographs and images that will help me create the route. You can see here I've been doing a lot of scenery placement, rocks, trees, bushes, all along into the woods. You look out into the valley, and you can see that the rendering distance is not great over a long distance. You can see areas down in the valley that I've been painting to resemble cornfields, and working with that. This little palette of colors is where I took the colors that are available in the painting tool here in the tool box. If you want to paint terrain, these various shades are available, and you can take any one of them you want to pick. And let's say we'll take mud, add a little mud down here, dark grass, bare grass, and you can change your brush sizes and paint large swaths, but this was just a little palette that I'd put out here in order to see what the different color schemes available in this list of terrain paints was available. And that can all go away with another paint job right over the top of it. But I just wanted you to see you can kind of pick out your colors from that list. We'll start here like with grass field. You got some idea of what I've done there now. You can see that I just did that, so I made my little palette that I'll be able to pick and choose the colors that I might want from these numbers here, because it gives you no indication in the asset list what it actually looks like. So it's like an artist paint tray where you have the various colors that you can go and pick, and I can go here and say I like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I like number 7. And I can click on number 7, and then I'll find number 7. So that's a little trick that I use. As I said before, to get rid of all this, all you have to do is paint the field one color. Let's increase the brush size down here. Here's your brush size. I'm going to change this over to 50, and then if I want to cover all that up, all I do is we'll go and make this plowed field, and it just covers right up. So you haven't made anything permanent. That's what's great about the undo button, and about being an artist. You can change things up any way you want. Now you see I'm going to cover all that up with a different color. It will all go away. Now I want to keep my paint palette, so I'm just going to hit the undo button, and there it is all back. Once I've saved, I would not have that ability to do that again. So just giving you an idea of what it looks like when you're painting some of the terrain. We go back up here to the mountain and we look off again into the valley. You can see some of that stuff would render from this distance, but it doesn't take very long till you get into the point where it will not render. It's so far away. So it's just a representation. Remember the limitations of the simulator. It's not going to give you the entire world in one rendering. There's a certain area around that it will render at any given point. Otherwise, the program could not, you couldn't have a computer that would be large enough to carry the program. And I know this is an older engine, and they have newer engines that they're using now, and the graphics are better, but we work with what we've got here. This simulator, I feel, has the best editor in it of all the ones that I have worked with. So you can see I've added all this so that it's not so plain. We have rock cuts, we have bushes, trees. Otherwise, you got a pretty plain world out there. And I'm not going to criticize anybody's work, but you know, it's fast when you just put trees out like this, just some scattered trees. And for some people, they're satisfied with that, but not I. I like to see it as much looking like the real world as I possibly can make it, so that when my train comes around, it looks like it belongs there in the middle of the creation. So, one of the first things that I want to do is I'm missing a milepost. I'm missing milepost number 7, which should be right along in this location, somewhere right here, somewhere right in here. And I had realigned some track when I started doing this creation right here, and so I lost the milepost. If you've got a milepost attached to a piece of track and you take that piece of track out, the milepost disappears because the little gizmo is no longer attached to anything when you delete the actual track. So we're going to go down here. We're going to talk about mileposts for a little bit. The closest one is this one, which is number 6, and I'm missing number 7. Now, how am I going to find out how to get number 7 back in there? Well, what I'm going to use is I'm going to use my profile chart, which is of the Tracy City Branch Railroad from the Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis Railway, showing the profile and alignment of the Tracy City Branch of the Chattanooga Division. It came from the Office of the Chief Engineer in Nashville, Tennessee. That's the cover page of the book. Inside we find a map, and this is the area that I'm modeling, the Cowan, Tennessee area. I'm modeling the main line, eventually I hope from Chattanooga to Nashville someday, but it's going to take a while to get that done. Right now I have from about milepost 70 or so at Estill Springs over to milepost 100 of the main line, which is south of Sherwood, Tennessee, and then I've been modeling the Tracy City Branch, and I've been modeling that in a couple of different sections, and I'm working on tying it together, and I hope to have a golden spike here one of these days when I finally complete that branch and get all the track laid on it. But this is what the map of the Tracy City Branch looked like in about 1915 to 1918, when the evaluation surveys were done of all the railroads in the country. Inside we also have a contents page which shows you the various items that are contained within the profile chart. We have an abbreviations and symbols page, and it shows us our curvature, how a curve is drawn on the alignment, like a 2-degree curve to the right or a 3-degree curve to the left. If we look at one of the profiles, here you are, there you have it. There's a 6-degree curve to the left, and a 5-degree 30-minute curve to the right, 6-degree curve to the right, a 10-degree curve to the left, all the way up to some 17-degree curves. That's a very sharp curve. You would rarely find that on a main line, but mainly on branch lines. 17 degrees is pretty tight. There's a 16-degree curve. There's another 16-degree curve. You can see here that this indicates GR, and those curves are so sharp that but they actually had a guardrail installed just in case the train tried to jump the track. The guardrail would hopefully keep the wheels from climbing out on a sharp curve as it went around the tight turns. That was an early way of trying to prevent derailments, was using a guardrail. You also see those on bridges. You'll find a guardrail installed down the center of the main line on bridges, in between the rails that the wheels actually roll over. The guardrail's there to hopefully prevent a derailment. Now, going back to our little index here, we have things like roundhouse or section houses, roads, different types of bridges and culverts, sections for each section of the railroad, where maybe there was a different section gang or a different valuation section. Note this book was made from notes of the valuation survey of 1915 and 16. And then look up here, we've got a little scale. 1 inch equals 3,000 feet. And 1 inch equals 50 feet in vertical scale. What I'm going to say about that is that's very good. You know, that you might say, well, I've got a scale that I can go here and I can lay me a scale across here, and I can tell exactly where this curve starts based on that scale. I would be very careful about trying to use a profile chart that has been copied and recopied and recopied and recopied in many different forms, and calling that as an accurate scale drawing anymore. I think there are too many generations of copies that have been made, and you're gonna find that you don't have as an accurate a drawing as you think in trying to use a scale to scale exactly the distance between these two mileposts, which is another thing I want to mention. Mileposts are not necessarily 100% accurate, particularly on an older railroad. As you will see here, I'm going to demonstrate to you. What they do use to try and give you some figures that you can use on these miles are stations. And down here on the bottom of the profile chart, this particular profile chart, not every profile chart has this. You find some of the older ones, they do have these station marks. And so a station is 100 feet, and we look at this number right here, which is milepost number 2, and this number of 106 plus 46 is 10,600 plus 46 feet, because that's 106 times 100, and then plus an additional 46 feet. This would be 14,200 plus an additional 66 feet, and so forth. And you say, wow, that sounds complicated. It's really not. Let's pull a calculator up here and look at it. And we're going to take the distance between, well, let me also make this statement. The starting point is what this number is to milepost 2. And the starting point could be a 0 milepost. It could be some point. Here they've just designated as the beginning of the valuation section, number 10. So we're going to assume that it's 10,646 feet from the starting point to this milepost number 2. Then we go to milepost number 3, and if we look at this, it's obvious that the distance between 3 and 4 is tremendously greater than 2 and 3. And if this were a scale drawing and we measure it, we would find out that that's true. But we have these numbers which we're going to use to make that same determination. And this is reliable, I think, as far as what we're trying to do in Train Simulator. Let's take this number for milepost number 3, 14,266, which is 142 times 100 plus 66 feet, or 14,266 feet. We subtract the 10,646, and we come up with 3,620 feet. Now a mile is 5,280 feet long. So this is what you would call a short mile. Why do we call it a mile when it's not a mile? Because it's between two mileposts. Between milepost 2 and milepost 3. Now, let's go on to the next one, 195.61. or 19,561 minus the figure from milepost 3, which is 14,266. We have 5,295. That is 15 feet long, so that's slightly a long mile. It's 15 feet longer than a mile. And so you can see that these mileposts can vary. Each one of these has a different number in between it. There are reasons for that. Surveying errors, changes in the grades, or curvature, where they've let some curves out, they've shortened some curves, they've lengthened some curves. There's a number of reasons that can happen over time, and hence these mileposts really just become reference point, for communication, for designating where something is at. But it's not 5,280 feet. And if you're trying to create a route and you go, well, milepost 4 is here, and then milepost 5 will be 5,280 feet from milepost 4, and milepost 6 will be 5,280 feet from milepost 5, and so forth, you're going to wind up with a bunch of errors because these mileposts are not the same. These stations are not the same in between the mileposts. And I cannot speak for more modern profile charts, but if you've got an original copy, you could certainly scale it and find out. But what happens if that mile lands in the middle of a bridge, or it lands in the middle of a switch, or a road crossing, for instance, or in the middle of a river? They didn't put a milepost down in the middle of the river, or they didn't put a milepost in the middle of the road. They would have to take it to the first point that they could take it to, where it would be clear of the train, clear of the public, clear of the right-of-way, of anything that might run over that milepost. So if it was in the middle of a 6-lane road, you could have a difference of 30 or 40 feet, maybe 50 feet in that mile post and the location that it was. So there's any number of things that could affect whether or not a mile is accurate or not. And in most railroad timetables, you will find that there are measured miles, and those measured miles are there for you to compare your speedometer to the measured mile. You have a chart that tells you how many seconds it takes to travel a measured mile at a specific speed. For instance, 1 mile in 1 minute, 60 seconds at 60 miles an hour. So 2 minutes at 30 miles an hour. So each of those speeds has a seconds that goes along with it, and you can calculate the seconds in a measured mile to compare to your speedometer. So any speed calculating you do, even driving down the interstate, when you're looking at the measured miles on the side of an interstate in the United States, I do that all the time, and it's pretty darn accurate. Those are built a lot more recently, and they have, I'm sure made an effort to place those mileposts the best they could along those interstates. But your railroad mileposts, you've got to be careful what you do with those. You could wind up making a mistake trying to just say that each mile is 5,280 feet. You're going to get your milepost in the wrong location. So what do we do about that? Well, in this case, I don't have a milepost 0. I don't have a milepost 1. How am I going to figure out, and this railroad's abandoned? I can't look on Google Earth. One thing you can do is you can look on Google Earth and find mileposts. Let me demonstrate that to you. We're going to fly away from milepost 6 here for a moment. We're going to go into downtown Cowan, because that's where I can show you a milepost on the main line in Google Earth. Past the Cumberland Cement Works. We're going down to mile 87. There's my milepost 87 on the main line of the Chattanooga subdivision. I'm going to turn on Google Earth with Control G. I'm going to fly out and pin out the Google Earth and we're going to look here. I'm going to bring the Google Earth into full strength, so to speak. If you move this slider left, you make it more opaque or more translucent, and if you move it over here, it's more opaque. So I can't really see what's going on in the train simulator. Now, I can also raise Google Earth up and down. And if we look here in Google Earth, we'll see this white post. I've been to Cowan. I've walked around downtown Cowan in real life, and I know that's a milepost. So that's a good location for me to start using as a location for my mileposts. If we lower that back down, you can see that I'm going to change the opacity of Google Earth. You'll see that I've placed my milepost there. So I've got a good starting point. I can now use this point to start my measurement and figure out where milepost 88 would be and where milepost 86 would be. And that's a much more accurate means of working within Train Simulator when you don't have a starting point. On the Tracy City branch, I had the very good fortune of having the property maps for this line, which I acquired from the state of Tennessee Property Assessor's Office. And what I was able to do was, since I'd laid my route using Google Earth, this route is abandoned at the present time. Looking in Google Earth, here comes the main line into the tunnel. And the Tracy City branch grade, you can see it here. And this will eventually be a walking trail called the Mountain Goat Trail. And someday I hope to be able to ride a bike down that and do a GoPro film of what exactly the route looked like all the way down the mountain. But until I can do that, I'm having to make some assumptions using Google Earth and what photographs that I can find. So as we look down here, you can see I'll change the opacity there. You can see I've used Google Earth to lay my tracks down on the grade. But what I did was, I came here to the center of the main line, and I had the good fortune of having this state of Tennessee property assessor's map, which tells me that the center line of the main track within the Cumberland Mountain Tunnel is at 110 plus 81, or 11,081. So I was able to take 11,081 and subtract where milepost 2 is located, which is this little area right here. This little symbol indicates the milepost, which means it's 2 miles to Cowan, 10 miles to Tracy City, or maybe that's 18 miles, I guess it is. And that milepost is located at 106 plus 46. So I subtracted 106.46 from the 110.81, and I was able to get an accurate point for my milepost number 2, which I placed. I used this as my starting point, and I measured all my miles from that point the rest of the way up the mountain from that starting point using the figures in the profile chart. And you'll note that this 106.46 is the same number that's in the property map. 106 plus 46 for the milepost. So I have 2 corresponding pieces of information from this property map that ties it all together for me. Now we'll go back up to where we want to put our milepost in, and I'll show you how to install a milepost. We're looking for milepost number 6, which is right here, and we're going to measure going to do a couple of things. One thing I'll tell you to do is go to Google and just Google feet to meters, and you'll get this handy little calculator here where you can enter in a figure and it will give you the conversion into meters. Now let's talk about that for just a minute. The program, of course, uses the metric system. It uses meters for the distances and kilometers for the distances within the program. And of course, most of your American profile charts and everything are going to have English measurements of the foot and the miles. So we have to convert. And just to give you an example here, I'm going here on our toolbox to the track, and this is the select tool. If I hit the select tool and I drop one here, and I go a little bit farther, and I've created a selection there. I look down here at my toolbar at the bottom, and I see the measurement is 5.34 meters. I come over here, and if I entered 5.34, that tells me that's 17.519 feet. It's just a random measurement, but I just wanted you to see how you can convert that using your measurements from inside the simulator, or if you have feet that you need to convert to a meter measurement, which is what we're going to be doing. First thing we're going to do is we're going to go to our profile chart, and we're going to look at milepost 6 to 7. We see that milepost 7 is located at 356 plus 6. 35606. Then we're going to subtract this distance of 30169. We have 5,437 feet. Now that's quite a long mile. What do we got there? Let's subtract 5280 from that. That mile's 157 feet longer. I wonder what the reasoning for that could be. Why they would have a post that would be 157 feet longer. I don't know whether they've changed some curvature. I don't know what that would be, but that's a dramatic difference, 100 feet. So we're going to go over here now. We're going to use our handy calculator. 5,437 feet is 1657.19. Now, with our select tool, we're going to use that as a measuring device. Tick Google Earth. I don't need Google Earth now. Let's turn Google Earth off. Turn Google Earth off with Control G. So if I approximate that and we take off with our select tool, heading up the mountain. Now the select tool's kind of difficult to deal with sometimes. You can get to go on. Let me just bypass here and see. I'll show you. It won't follow me here now. I got it out of the range, out of the picture, and it did not want to follow me. So you got to always kind of keep it within your range of your view. Now we're getting close, because I've already had this milepost here before. I know it's right around the front of this mountain. We're looking for 1657.19. Now you notice I can't get that measurement down here at the bottom of the toolbar to get down real precise. What you've got to do is you got to zoom on in down here, and then you can get it down as precise as you want to make it. Trying to do it from too high of an elevation makes it almost impossible. So there we are. 1657.19 roughly. And This is a little bit tricky, but what I have to do is I need to come over to my asset list and find that milepost from the horseshoe curve. Alright, it's not going to appear in this list that I'm looking at. I'm on the track list, and the assets in track are appearing down here. So my milepost does not appear. I've got to go back over to the main objects or assets list in order to find that milepost. Now if I click and make this marker go away, I won't have my marker anymore. Now the good thing about it is this marker is sitting right on a point where we have some track delineation, where this section of track and a new piece of track started. So that's the end of one piece of track and the start of another piece of track. I can use that as a point where I can put my milepost and hedge just a little bit that way. Or you know what else you can do? You can use your finger, which you can't see me doing, and I've placed my finger on the rail right by this marker. And I'm clicking on that, I'm making that disappear, and I'm coming over here and I'm clicking now in the toolbox, and I've selected the object tools, and there's my HSC milepost. I'm going to drop it here, and I'm going to pull the gizmo right over here to where I had it basically marked. With my finger, right click and get rid of the extra one that you have there. I'm going to click on it again, and I'm going to move Mr. Milepost down to where he's in alignment with. I'm going to pull him out of the stone there a little bit. So there we have that. Now let's click on track again, and there's our little triangle where the track's, and I'm slightly ahead of that, so I'm happy with that. That'll work. But I'm not happy with the fact I've got to twist this milepost around. I need to grab this little circular bar and get it where the milepost, you can see the numbers as you should from either direction. Bear with me, I know I'm slow, methodical. Don't give me a TLDW, too long, didn't watch, in the comments, because I'm trying to give you some tricks and tips that will help you out. And I know I go on and on and on, but that's just the way it is with us old southern boys. We kind of draw on. So we got a milepost there. Hey, it says milepost 0, but we know this is milepost 7. Double click on it. Here in this little box we'll be able to change our number. We put a 7 there. Right click on the outside world over here, and looky there, there's a 7 on our milepost. We've just installed a milepost, and we know it's fairly accurate. Accuracy. How accurate do you want your railroad to be? I want it to be as accurate as I can make it within reason. That's why I look up photographs, I look up profile charts. I have an advantage here. I have a lot of information about this railroad that I'm able to use. Sometimes you get into building a railroad and all you've got to work with, if you don't have a profile chart, are the images that you can find in Google Earth or online, and then you've got to use Google Earth, as I've taught you in some of my previous tutorials, to get your grades. I would go through and I would check my elevation, you know, in Google Earth at various points, and I would set my grades based on that. And it can be kind of aggravating if you don't have the advantage of having all the profile charts and information that I've been lucky enough to have with this railroad. You say, well, I'll just make all the mileposts 5,280 feet apart. That's not very accurate. You don't have much information to go on there, but if that's all you can do, what else are you going to do? That's where site visits, when you can, might help out, because you might actually be able to go out, staying off railroad property, of course. You might be able to photograph from some highway or some you know, public accessible area, information that you need. You find a lot on the internet if you just look around. Lots of railroad historical societies have profile charts for various railroads that you might want to try and look up. I wanted to show you this overhanging rock that I've added here. Got a couple of different views of that. You say, well, how did you decide to hang a rock out there like that? Well, because I found a picture that shows the rock hanging out there like that. Can I get it 100%? No, but I can give you a representative flavor. I have another photograph. This is a much more modern photograph. This is from the opposite direction. This is the old railroad grade, and this is what they're working on, making a biking and hiking trail eventually. But they're still working on some property acquisition. I found this on the internet. So before somebody attacks me for saying, well, you went on somebody else's property, I didn't. I found it on the internet. So eventually, hopefully, this will be public access where people can go and ride their bikes. And you can imagine you're an engineer on the mountain goat line, and you better bring some extra brake shoes with you for your bicycle, because it's going to be downhill all the way, sometimes at 3%, steep downgrade. So anyway, I just wanted you to see some things that you can do to try and create and make the world look like you find out there, so that you have an accurate looking simulation. As I've stated before, I've pretty well gotten all my grades set on the railroad, and I'm working on setting the grade on this highway. One of the things I have not done is I've not adjusted any of the scenery where I've had to use the snap tool to get the highway to the right gradient, and I've got to come back and smooth all that out. And we're going to do some of the same sort of stuff here on where I'm going to show you how to decorate here. Milepost 5. We're going to go down here to Milepost 4 and talk a little bit. Now here we are at Milepost 4. This is Milepost 4 back when the line existed. It had a cast iron milepost. In this image we can get a lot of information. Old telegraph pole line. This is 1970, so by this time the telegraph was pretty well done, and they're letting the trees grow up. In the days when the telegraph was important, there would have been no brush or trees that would have interfered with the pole lines. But nature sort of takes back over as time goes by when man stops maintaining it for whatever reason. Nature eventually has pretty well closed this entire railroad in since the track was taken out. But as I said, they'll eventually make the walking trail that we'll be able to enjoy. Here in this photograph we can see kind of the lay of the land. It's kind of sloping. This would be going up the mountain, and to the left this direction is down into the valley, and we see some rock outcroppings or stone that has been uncovered and just pushed to the side as they were plowing their way through here, creating this route. We'll be using this photograph quite a bit, so as we start, because I'm going to start right here at Milepost 4 and give you some tips and tricks on scenicking a line. Now we're going to look at some more photographs from the line. This is all in the same trip where someone was able to actually ride the train and photograph this in 1970 as a passenger. You look off in the valley, you can see all sorts of things. It would be nice if our simulator would render the distance that far, but it doesn't. But this is the town of Cowan, where the line starts. The cement factory we talked about earlier in this tutorial just a little bit, the Cumberland Mountain Cement Factory. But you can see all the different pastures and cornfields and bean fields that are out there. Can't really pick out any of the highways or anything like that, but you see property lines with fence rows and tree growth and things like that. And we'll try and simulate that in the simulator as best we can for a nice look off from the top of the mountain. This is early in the morning on the same trip. There was still some snow on the ground. It's wintertime. I think it was February of 1970. It had a light snow. But this is very near the Milepost 7 that we just installed, where the road comes down between the railroad and the valley. And you use these photographs to help get the idea of what the scenery looks like, what assets you need to add into the railroad to make it look appropriate. Again, this is the upside, the mountainside. This is the valley side, and you can see that as the tracks are passing through, they've gone through a little cut that they had to cut in here. I'm always amazed when you think that this railroad was built in the 1850s, and the tools that they had to work with, black powder and mules, teams of mules, and I don't know what kind of drag line or something they could have been pulling along with, teams of mules when they were constructing this. Men, shovels, picks. A lot of work went into building this railroad with what we would consider primitive methods today. I'm not certain whether the steam shovels were in use at this time or not. I kind of highly doubt it. I don't know that that had been perfected yet. But anyway, a lot of work went into building this, and you can see we have general brush and some trees that, in the summertime you wouldn't be able to see anything but basically the trees on each side of the railroad because it's so overgrown. The woods are very thick. This is a shot from the caboose on the train as they're going down the mountain. You can see a typical branch line train. It had some coal that they'd picked up, some box cars. One, the doors open. I suspect these were goods that were coming into and had been unloaded at one of the stations on the line. The door is open on this boxcar, which tends to make me believe that they've unloaded some lumber, some bricks, something, from inside the boxcar. Then they had a couple of covered hoppers in the cut that were most likely chicken feed. There are a lot of broiler houses where they raise chickens for food processing, and that's, one of the ways that they got the chicken feed into the farmers cooperative. Over here we see a pole line, and this says on here mile 430, so that's 3/10 mile 4 and 3/10. And the Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis would put a metal sign on each of their poles every 1/10 of a mile so that you had a more accurate reading on if you needed to report that the pole line was damaged. You could say it was between 4.2 and 4.3. It would give them an idea when you were making that report, or if there was a problem with a washout or whatnot. It gave you very accurate. And when the pole lines went away, these of course went away. So you can only really give the information that's between mile 1 and 2, and just give an approximation, or between mile 3 and 4 in this case. So that was a handy little thing that the railroads had. Again, we see trees and brush and shrub and gentle slopes. The ledge that the railroad was cut out and installed on. Another scene from the caboose heading down the mountain. This is shooting from the rear of the caboose, I think in that same 4.3 area, looking up the mountain in an S-curve. Very sharp. Sharp radiuses around those turns. This was a 10-mile-an-hour railroad, maybe 15 in the day for a passenger train. But going down a steep grade, a train cannot allow its speed to get up too great, because the brakes will not compensate for the weight that they're taking down a steep grade like that. And this was what was called a retainer grade. All the loaded cars on the train that was coming down the mountain had the retaining valves turned up so that the brakes could be controlled, leaving Sewanee and down to 2 and 3% grade all the way to the bottom. That's one of the engineering skills that's required for a locomotive engineer to be able to handle a train down a steep grade. So if the speed got much above 10 or 15 miles an hour, that train's going to really be a runaway, because if it's got enough weight behind it, you could take 4 or 5 miles to get it stopped if it didn't derail before it reached the bottom of the mountain. The speed, there's been some terrible wrecks as a result of the speed overcoming the ability of the car braking systems and the dynamic brakes on the locomotives to be able to control the train. So when you've got a steep downgrade like this, you can expect the speed to be 10 to 15 miles an hour. In the United States, the famous Saluda grade had a timing section in which you had to control your train through that timing section for a particular period between, I think, around 12 miles an hour. 12. If you got over 15 miles an hour, you were going to avoid the timer, and it was going to send you into what was called the runaway track. But if your timing was correct, then you were lined down the main line, and you were able to continue on down the mountain. They had a number of serious derailments where huge pileup occurred as a result of the speed getting too great for the downgrade. But that's in Saluda, North Carolina, where they had 4 and 5% grades on that mountain, the steepest mountain grade on a main line in the United States. Here we're now almost down to the bottom, or we're getting close to the tunnel, I should say, and you can see there's a lot of evergreen in evidence. Evergreens seem to populate where the limestone is. Cedars and pines. See a pole line right away up here for a power line, high power of some kind. Lots of voltage there. You see kind of a rock outcropping along the edge that had to be chipped away in order to build the railroad. So that'll give us some idea of what we need to be putting out there along for some scenic detail. We'll minimize all of these out. We can refer back to them as we go along learning. Here's our milepost 4 again. So what we're going to start with here at milepost 4, we're going to start with actually smoothing up the terrain, because if you look, it's not as abrupt. Got some of these rock outcroppings right here, but it's not as abrupt as the snap tool has made it here. So I'm going to start out and show you how to smooth some of that down using the tools that are available within the program. So getting started here, my idea is to make some alterations to the way that the snap tool has cut through here. We look at, there are areas here where the fill had to be brought up underneath the track at grade, and then there are areas where it had to cut through the terrain in order to pass through. And just for a brief overview, let's go up here and play with this just a little bit. We'll get our painting tools going here. I'm going to use the down for just to decrease height for just a minute. I'm going to come right here under this track, and I'm going to just push this down just for the fun of it, for demonstration purposes. Now you see I've created an opening under the track. Now I've covered this in some previous tutorials, but what you do is you use the snap tool and you run up through here, and I generally set my snap tool for the brush size about 15 when I'm doing track. And that raises it up but doesn't make it exaggerated. It keeps me close by. As I'm using the snap tool now, I'm using snap. What that does is it brings the surrounding terrain up to the bottom of your track as you go up through here. And you can see how choppy and exaggerated it is, and I have like a 30-degree embankment set, cut angle, and a 30-degree embankment set. And it's just the nature of the program that this is the way it sort of chops it all together. You see it's left me with a kind of even though I went right down the middle of everything, it didn't pull that up. If I get out here to the side a little bit, I can make it pull it up. And that looks a little better. Okay, so that's how the snap tool works. But let's undo all that and take it right back to where we were. And see what we can do with it. I'm going to do a save. So if anything happens and the program crashes for any reason, I haven't lost anything that we've created so far. Okay, so we got all this choppiness, and we're going to smooth all some of that out. We've got the choppiness in the cuts where we put it through there. We're going to use the tools. I'm going to begin to show you some of my tricks for smoothing out the terrain. Now we see here that the snap tool has created quite a ledge here, and if we go back and look at our photograph again, I'm going to pull that photograph over to the side here where we can refer to it and leave it open. You can see that it's a lot closer in. So what we're going to do here is we're going to come back and correct some of these things that the snap tool has done to us. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use what I like to use is the smooth tool, and I'm going to set that for 15. We're going to hold that at 15, and we're going to come over and we're just going to start snapping. Now notice I'm clicking, and what it's doing is starting to raise that in, and it's smoothing out this sharp nature that we have over here, the sharp edges. Notice it's slung up onto the grade a little bit. Don't worry about that right now. This is not an exact science. This is not perfect. There may be some places where I actually wind up covering the track. We'll come back and we'll fix all that. What I'm doing here, I'm just clicking and working on trying to make it appear more like what it looks like in the real world. Take a peek over here. See, it's a more gentle slope. Same thing is true over here on this side. I'm just clicking. If I just click and hold and then move it around, all sorts of things happen. I don't like that. I'm going to undo it. But remember, every time you click, that's a new action, and you only have so many undos that you can do before it gives you the sorry, you're out of undos, and you can't go back and correct something. So you want to go a little bit at a time, assess it, and decide if you like it or not, and then do a save. It raises sometimes, it lowers sometimes. See, I really kind of dug out there. I'm going to give a couple of undos there and put it back to a point where I think it's more appropriate. There we go. We're going to. Sometimes I'll click and then I'll just spin around and around and around and around, left and right, and in circles. Now you see I've opened up some places under the rail here. We can get that back. How do we get that back? Use the snap tool. And look what it did. It brought my sharp edges back again. So what I typically like to do when I have that situation is I like to use the height tool, increase height, and bring back slowly. Oh, he's going over the top of the track. That's okay, because we're going to go back to the smooth tool here, and we're going to smooth some of that back out. Little clicks at a time. See, it raises and lowers. And you accomplish that by moving over different height areas, and it begins to raise and lower things a little bit. See, I get a little bit up on the track like this. I don't really have a problem with the ballast line being encroached by the surrounding terrain, because very few railroads are perfect as far as what it looks like beside the rails. There are ditches, of course, for drainage, but it's not always a perfect landscape alongside the railroad. I like where I got it up here. I can switch over to my decrease height, and I can just bump it and take it down. On there and lower it back down, rather than use the snap tool. Because what's going to happen if I use the snap tool, it's going to take it down to perfect alignment with the edge of the right-of-way, the edge of the roadbed that's under the track. See what I did? I made it perfect again. Perfect, at least as far as the ballast edge is concerned. But in real life, it doesn't really look that way. So I'm using the decrease height tool to just pop the surrounding area and bring it down. I might need to smooth that up because it's got kind of a ridgy look to it there. I can swing this around, jiggle it around, make it go up and down in a number of ways. Use that decrease height. This is trial and error. You're looking for what looks good for you. When those ridges happen, the smoothing tool does a really good job of bringing everything down to kind of an appearance that you would like to see. Am I ever going to make it 100% exactly like the real world terrain? Most likely not. It's not within the limitations of the program to be able to do that. Kind of a monster right there by working too far in front of myself there. Because why? Because we've got a cut coming up here. See what we've got there? The snap tool made a huge cut. Now we know it's not really that way, but if I take this smoothing tool and work it down, we're going to come up with a whole lot better looking result. I have my photographic evidence that says that it's kind of a gentle slope. All that clicking you hear in the background is my using the arrow tools to achieve what I'm trying to achieve here from a viewpoint. That clicking is me clicking my mouse. Every time I click the mouse, you see the little target in the middle of that hash area there moving around. Can't forget the downstream side. Got to make certain that I keep the under the road bed filled in. Use a little elevation here. This little spot right here under that milepost really is being a booger. Okay, I think I finally got it close. You see all this trial and error? You got to work on it, work on it. They chiseled this railroad out on the side of a bluff. Now I'm smoothed it up. Now I'm sort of raising it up now so that I have more of a embankment look. Getting it filled back in under the road bed where I had lost it around through there. And I may still do some smoothing tool before it's over with. Always remember that undo. If there's something you don't particularly care for. Now I filled it in. Look back here at the some of the slopes. See, it's a little bit wide around the edge of it. It's not necessarily a rock bluff all the way up through there. Some gently descending slopes. You can see it takes some time to work your way through some of this. Nothing wrong with that. You're like an artist painting a photograph, or painting a masterpiece, I should say. This is your masterpiece that you're working on. And hopefully you'll create something that you'll want to share with everyone before it's over with. Sometimes I go back over the same area 2 or 3 times as I get it headed into the direction I want it to be. And these techniques that I use, I've just learned by trial and error. What is this going to make it look like? Erosion and time changes everything in this world. Nature takes back over if something is not maintained on an annual basis. So we've kind of smoothed everything up here in this little section around milepost number 4. I think we've got an adequate slope based on the photographic evidence. So let's play around a little bit with some trees. Well, the first thing I want to do is I'm going to paint some ballast. We're going to go to the brush, painting tools, paint terrain. I'm going to select track bed as the color. I'm going to reduce the size of my brush down to 10, and I'm going to put a little ballast down here. You'll see it start to blend in there alongside. Might be getting a little bit wide, but that's alright. We'll come back and cover that up. You'll find preferences for what you like as far as colors and techniques, changing your brush size. Let's talk about that for just a minute. If I change that brush size to 40 right now, look at the swath of stone that I'm putting down. That's huge. Don't need it that much, so we'll undo that. Change this back to 10. Brush size makes a difference. Clicking brings in small amounts at a time. I'm going to leave this little section for our discussion at another time, because fills can be, high fills, F-I-L-L, can be aggravating. Use a little down here and smooth out some of these lines that are creeping up on the edge of the railroad. Okay. Hey, I've got some openings that I created there I don't like. Let's go back here and fill those back in. Put that back on 15. I like 15 for my brush size when I'm doing terrain. 10's a little small. It's not doing a large enough area to suit me. I thought I had this all filled in. I must have went to dancing around with the smoothing tool and wound up making some openings. Alright, go back to the brush and get a little more track bed around this corner. Okay. Let's take a quick look at our photo. Oops, wrong photograph. Now this is winter, so we don't have quite the perspective that you have in the summertime where you can't see anything out in the woods. I think the next thing we'll attempt to do here is put some stones in here. I'm going to increase this height just a little bit around through here. A little bit smooth. Go down. A little more smooth. A lot of down. Okay. Let's go over here to our rocks and our object list, I should say, and we'll find a variety of rocks that we're going to use. I'm going to click on this bag right here, which is miscellaneous, and you'll find a lot of the scenery details under miscellaneous that you might want to use. Rocks and gravel piles, all sorts of little details. Here we go, GX rock grouping 1. Now look, I've got a rock grouping here. Okay. Sometimes what I like to do is go find me a flat piece of earth somewhere else, and I'll bring assets up and I'll click them out so I can see what some of these things look like. I like to know what I'm buying before I put it into the picture, so to speak. These are all different size rock groupings. That are available in this route's assets. Now these rock groupings are static, or they're linear, I guess you should say. They're not flexy. Some of the assets that you will find in your objects list are flexy. In other words, they will hug the terrain based on however the terrain is shaped. However, these are not. These are linear, and you can use this X and Y, the legacy gizmo they call it, down here. This is what the original looks like, and you can grab it and tweak it and move things around based on the arrows that are on there. I actually like the TS14 one, which gives you this rotating capability, so you can actually rotate this linear object into the shape, the position you want it to be in. For instance, if we want to set it on the ground here, you see some of it starts to disappear underground. I can rotate that around and make it have a different appearance. I can put more. You don't want it to float, of course, but if I lower it down to where nothing's floating, it changes the shape and size of the rocks. Again, this is your preference. You've got to look at it and see. Obviously, you don't want floating objects, but you might have to give up some of the asset in order to get it where it looks appropriate. You can rotate it around in all sorts of different directions and make it look. You can see how you could make this appear correct on any kind of slope. But that's one type of asset that we're dealing with there. Another type is the flexi, and I'm going to go down here to the let's see if it mountains. I think these are basically the same ones, and they're not flexi. There's another group. There's so many assets to pour through when you import them in. That's why it's good to make a list. I think it's St. Paul has some flexis here. They have flexi and non-flexi. This is a different style of stone boulder. So here is a flexible one. As I move it around onto various shapes, you will see that it's changing its position somewhat. Let's pick a different grouping. There, here we go. As I move it around, it's staying right on the surface of the area that I'm putting it down on. It doesn't go. See how that rock's changing position as I rotate it around? That's what a flexi does. Let's pick another grouping. You can bump assets into each other to form other rock outcroppings, change the appearance of it. The program doesn't really care, but the more assets you put together like that, the more likely you are to have some frame rate issues if you start getting an area, you know, with too many assets in it. You've got to have a very fast computer for certain. There's all sorts of things that you can get and use as your assets for creating the scenery and make something appear like a bluff or a stone sticking up out of the ground. That's a very low poly item there. But you see here, depending on what you're doing with it, you may have to do a lot of working with it to get it to lay down the way you want it. Okay, we're going to use some of these assets now, but I want to show you another trick here. I don't need all this junk. Again, as I say, sometimes I'll go off and create in an area, you know, just like I did with my paint palette down in the valley, you know, something I can work with. Now what I can do here is I can click and drag, and you notice I've highlighted all that. If I hit the delete, away it goes. It leaves me with nothing extra hanging around on the route that I don't want. So if we come down here, we look at our photograph, we see we've got some stone hanging around here, kind of a depression. More than likely there's a culvert that goes under there, because as the water runs down, it collects into a channel and makes its way down to the railroad, and then they generally had to have a culvert under the railroad in order to carry that water away. Let's see here. I've got to get that photograph where I can keep pulling it up when I want to. Okay, here we go. So as we look here, we see right past the milepost we've got some stone. So we're going to add some stone in here. We're going to use these rock boulder groups. I'm going to turn some of this around. See how it's, as I'm tweaking it around, it's moving around for me. And I can come back and I can click on any of those individual items and lower them in, do a little twisting, give some different appearance. I might like to see decrease the height, increase the height, a little rotating, that sort of thing. I can also come back in with my height tool if I want to bring a little earth up around it a little more, change a little bit. Looks like there was a bit of a depression over here. We can cut that back in there if we want to. Okay. Continue on around. If we want that to appear like a creek bed where the stones get rounded off, you can go back to this other set of stone we had in GX. Add some of those down in here and tweak them around. See here, I'm going to take that one. I know, see, it's floating. I'm going to take it, I'm going to rotate it around until I get it to where it's not floating. Rotate, change things up, create any way you want to. I did not mean to do that. There we go. Putting the rocks out in the woods in various groupings and then rearranging them. Takes a little time, but adds a special touch that begins to make it look like the real world. You can grab this ball on the inside and rotate that around in any way you want to. That's what's neat about that particular widget or gizmo. Just trying to give it a natural look. And you have to use the assets that are available within the game. Sometimes it won't be 100% accurate, but it might be close enough. Okay, now we're going to look at the trees. And one of the trees that I like to use is in the clinch field route. It's a flexi group. There are two different flexi rows of trees, flexi row 1 and flexi row 2. Let's try 1. Now again, with flexi, I'm moving it around, it's following the terrain to some degree, which is very handy. I've got a depression there, it's swinging out over that depression right in the middle there, so I'd have to come back and tweak that by hand to get it to lay down. Pick that out again, and this is one that I like to use along the edge of the right-of-way because it is 3D and it gives the appearance of a real forest. And now notice, come over here, that one's down, that one's down, all those appear to be fairly well down. But if you'd like them to appear shorter, if you'd like them to appear closer to the ground, you just highlight this one tree in the middle, which is the center of the universe for that row of trees, and you can just lower the whole thing down. I can take the ball and I can tweak it up a little bit. Nothing is symmetrical in the woods. You know, everything is growing individually. Let's now take and look for, in the clinch field assets, embankment, large. Here's a huge embankment. And swing that around, you can see how long that is. That's too large for an ascending grade usually. So let's go down to medium and see what that looks like. That looks like it will work a little better for us. Can swing that over here right beside the rails and begin to adjust it. I can tweak it with our gizmo, get it on the right gradient going up the grade, so to speak. Then I can look and make certain that it's, am I floating or not? If I'm floating, I can tweak it around a little more. Then I can come down with it and actually set that down in the ground so it won't appear to be floating. Once I get it on an angle like that, it's easy for me to, with it highlighted in red, click the copy button and I get a duplicate of that with already the gradient sort of set on it. Just lower it right into position. Let's try another medium. And let's try setting it down on this side where we had the pole line running up through there. Do a little rotating, get it adjusted. Hey, that's pretty close to the track, but you know what? Sometimes the overgrowth does get up close to the track. Kind of like that. We'll take that. I'm going to copy it, bring it down here, do the same thing with it, rotate it around. You got to have some underbrush under your trees. If I don't like that position or don't want it to look like it's a repeat, I can turn it around 180, bring it back. Work it in. Take a look at that and see what that looks like. Let's try a different one. We have small, got a little floating action going there. We'll work on that. Tweak it a little bit, lower it down. Copy that. Drop another one in over here. Obviously this is time consuming, but it's going to give a pleasant look to the route. Oops, undo that. Got to make sure you highlight the right thing as you're going to make a little change. Look at that, we've got some growth. Things are beginning to happen here. I use a lot of the assets from the Clinchfield route. Pick out a couple of other objects, splice in there, fill in some of the gaps. Get them turned in the location you want them to be in. Raise and lower them for the effect that you're looking for. So you get different heights, varying heights. Single tree you can add in if you wanted to. I'm going to go ahead and add some other trees in here right now because I want to have some color, some single trees in this area that I'm going to show you how we're going to fill this in all the way up to the top of the mountain so that there's some color involved. I'm doing this so I'll have some 3D trees that will change color because I put a lot of 2D trees, two-dimensional trees in with this, and this will, when it goes into fall, will give an early fall kind of look with these 3D trees in the area. Okay. Continuing on here, get back to our tree line flexi row. Come up here and copy this asset. Tweak it around. Make it look like some good undergrowth. Takes a little patience, but you can create an epic looking scenery swath on your railroad. Vary it up, pick different assets and put in there so you have a different look. Down a little bit, a little rotation in it, down, then bring it down into the terrain some there, so you have some different looking flora. Sometimes you get a hold of the wrong asset and start moving it around, you'll mess up what you've already done. That's what your undo button is for, don't forget. I hate it when it jumps out like that on you, but it'll do that sometimes, and you just gotta tweak it around till you get it back in the position you want it in. Might have to change your perspective just a little bit. Copy that gentleman, bring him down here, put down a couple of them, So even though our photograph is a winter time, I'm doing this obviously as summer here. And some of the assets do change with the seasons to give you that winter look. I'm getting pretty filled in there now. It's starting to look like something. We can come back here. We can use our painting tools. Let's go down to like a 7.5 on the brush size. And let's pick out some mud. How about that? Fill in some of these places where I got a little carried away with the gravel. Let's go back and look at our pictures for just a moment. One of the things that you'll notice, maybe not in that particular shot, but there was one of the shots, you see a lot of cinder ballast and or coal dust that has come off the coal cars as they're coming down the mountain for close to 125 years, I would say. So you know, you might go down here and pick out coal, and you might come along here and put a little coal dust along the railroad, because that's what was along the railroad. Let's say if you don't want to be totally repetitive, you can spin it around and change it a little bit, have a different appearance. Let's look for that flexi row again. Now, what I want to do is I want to show you how we really turn on some assets. See, I've done basically along the railroad right away with 3D and with some stones and some underbrush. Let's go find an asset block. There are two types of asset blocks in this. A for asset. Asset block. Two types. One is a square, which I drop it down there. I can change the size of it. I can right-clicking unhighlights it, left-clicking highlights it. I can change the size of it by pulling on these yellow areas. If you're in the flat world, that's the perfect thing to use. However, on the side of the mountain, it's not going to work. Leaves too many assets floating in the trees, floating in the breeze, I should say. So I'm going to use this asset block irregular. I'm going to show you how that works. I'm going to start out right here. I'm going to put a pin down. You see there's a pin. I'm going to follow along right along my flexi row of trees. By irregular, that means that you're putting it down in whatever shape you really want it to be in. We'll come a little farther around. Now we're going to start going up the mountain. Now we're going to come across the top of the mountain. And we'll bring it back down. Then I right click and it's all over with. Alright, I've created an asset block that we're now going to put in some two-dimensional trees. Again, I have my own preferences. You're going to work with what preferences you like. So what I'm going to do now is inside this, which is highlighted, I'm going to double click it. And look what happened. Oh my goodness. We have trees everywhere. So what you have when you look at this is you have the density, which I'm going to immediately reduce down to about 2,000. I'm just going to click outside that block and it should decrease it. Now, it did decrease it, but not to the extent that I want it. I'm going to change trees. Those are 3D trees. I'm going down to the clinch field, and I have some particular trees that I like for the area that I'm modeling, and that's the Far Tree Miscellaneous Large 1, and then Far Tree Miscellaneous 2. Okay, all right. Now what I'm going to do, you see I've put in a lot of trees. It's beginning to look like a forest. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click copy. Then I'm going to click paste, and I'm bringing in another asset block identical to the one that I just put there. And what I want to do is I want to bring it down in a very similar position but slightly offset so I can differentiate between the two. And I lay it down. Alright, now I want to point out that the majority of the time using this irregular block, your trees are going to be down on the ground where they should be. And I'm using a single tree. If I used a row of trees, I would have some of the trees would probably not be touching the ground. So it's important to remember to use a single tree when you do this. So now I'm going to click on highlight that one. I'm going to double click it, and I have the same trees in there. I'm going to change to two different trees. Clinchfield Far Tree Miscellaneous Large 3. You see we have a different style tree. Okay, we're going to select Miscellaneous Large Tree 4. So now we've got 4 different trees in this asset block, or the 2 asset blocks. And when we begin to look at this from the perspective of the terrain, that's pretty full. You can randomize some positions by hitting the randomize button. And we can also add back some density. Let's go to say 5,000. It really fills in. All depends on what your computer will tolerate. So I did 5,000 on that asset block. Let's change and do this asset block to 5,000 and then see what that looks like. We have really filled it in. If I've got something in close proximity, I can come back and add individual trees. fill in, or groups of trees, depending on how dense you want your forest area to appear. Just remember, the more assets that you add, the more strain you're going to put on your frame rate. I'm going to add some pines into the mix. Again, this is all preference. There's no hard, fast way of saying this is exactly what I want, what it should be. Make it look appealing. Vary what you put in there so you have some variety. So we've gone from being totally barren to creating a world. Let's do the same thing on the bottom. We'll find our asset block, irregular, and we'll try and keep it in the same general vicinity. How far down would you like it to go? Let's change it to 5,000. Let's pick our trees out. Now we'll copy that. And we'll paste it back in. And we're going to change one of those to miscellaneous tree 3 and miscellaneous tree 4. Randomize, randomize. We'll add some pines into the mix. You can see the process. We've gone from a barren desert to beginning to create a fully scenic railroad right-of-way. Where you see there are elements that are missing, we can come back in and add those as need be. You can make it as dense as you want to be, but only what your computer will support. The undo button always comes in handy. So you get the flavor of what you've got going on. You've gone from having nothing to having something that's pretty appealing and will look good when you're running a train through there. You know what I haven't done? I haven't saved. Hit that F2. Hit it more often than I've hit it during this presentation, so that you don't lose all this hard work. Because if the program crashes, ruh-roh, all this would be gone. Nothing would be here. So I'm just about going to wrap this one up. There's miles and miles and miles of work to do. Because I've been talking so much, it hasn't gone as fast as I normally go. There are other things you can do. You can paint different colors under the trees. This is forest floor 1, and you can put forest floor 2 down for some variation. Let's get us a little larger brush size where you can see something happening there. Paint some different colorations. Put some splotches of color for the varying highlights, lowlights of what a forest might look like. It's just like being an artist. What looks appealing to your eye, you go out and do some of that. All right. Well, I hope you found this tutorial on scenery and mileposts helpful. It is a slow process to detail a route and requires lots of patience. I think the results are worth it to make the overall simulation experience better. Keep watching my channel for more tutorials and my videos depicting the trains in operation on the route in various scenarios. As always, leave me a kind comment of what you thought. If you have a better way of accomplishing the task we have discussed, please share it with others. Leave me a like, and until next time, have a great day.